After weeks of demand raised by opposition parties, we've finally seen a discussion on price rise in the parliament. Both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha have seen lengthy speeches and a response from the finance minister on the issue of rising prices in India. Now, is the opposition, is the Congress party satisfied with that response? And the biggest question of all, really, from the point of view of all of us viewers, have we got the answers we need in the middle of unprecedented inflation? To speak more on this, I'm joined today by Mr. Manish Tewari. He is a Member of Parliament from Anandpur Sahib and, of course, a veteran Congress leader, former Union Minister as well. Mr. Tewari, thank you so much for speaking with us on the Times Network. Let me begin by asking the question about whether you're satisfied with the reply you've heard from the Finance Minister. The demand for a debate on price rise was ongoing for several days, but when she finally spoke, sir, your party and your leaders walked out. Why is that, sir, and are you satisfied with the response?
Well, Tamanna, if we would have been satisfied with the response, we obviously wouldn't have walked out. It became fairly clear right at the inception of the debate itself that the finance minister was not interested in giving a structured reply, but as she said, scored political brownie points. And that's not something which is expected of a finance minister in the unprecedented times that we are living in, whereby inflation, unemployment, and agrarian distress are really haunting people and stressing household budgets in a manner which has never been seen before. Rather than address the question squarely, rather than admit that there's a problem and the government is intending to address it, what the finance minister tried to do was actually tell the House that, look, the whole world is belaboring under this crisis, which is understandable. But India is the shining spot among all these belabored nations, which unfortunately, for the lack of a better word, is simply not true. And so therefore, what we detected was that the government and the finance minister were in complete denial, and they just wanted to airbrush the problem as if it didn't exist.
But let me come to the point about we're better than others. If I were to just very, briefly summarize what the finance minister was trying to say, yes, it was essentially there is inflation, but we're better off than others. We are more secure. We've taken a lot of steps, and it's not as bad as the rest of the world. On the first point, Mr. Tewari, would you admit to the fact that this is a geopolitical issue? This is not something of the making of the Indian government. Pandemic, 3 waves of COVID-19, the Russia-Ukraine war has spiked inflation all over the world. Isn't that the factual situation?
Well, the factual situation, Tamanna, is that the Indian economy started going into a tailspin even before COVID-19 happened and the Russian-Ukrainian war took place. In fact, to put it a little crudely, if you allow me to say so, India has actually been a beneficiary of the Russian-Ukrainian war in terms of being able to access not only cheaper crude oil, but cheaper fertilizer also. But be that as it may, that's a different debate altogether. The short point which I tried to make was that making COVID-19 or the Russian-Ukrainian war as the whipping boy for India's current crisis is completely and absolutely trying to delude the people. Because if you travel back to the 8th of November 2016, when demonetization was unleashed on a helpless nation, the Indian economy has been in a tailspin ever since. A badly implemented GST only accentuated the situation. And by the time you came to 2019, the finance minister almost or was compelled to present budget after budget in order to try and rescue an ailing economy, which didn't work. If you recall, in the September of 2019, she decided to give concessions of 1,45,000 crores to corporate India in terms of lowering the corporate income tax, thinking that that would kickstart the virtuous cycle of the economy, fire the cylinders of the economy. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And then COVID-19 happened, which only accentuated and exacerbated the situation. The short point being that if the economy wouldn't have been mismanaged between 2014 and 2019, we would have been in a better position to even surmount the pandemic.
I want to come to the specific point, and I take on board what you've said, sir, and there are others who believe that the Indian economy in terms of growth was already ailing pre-COVID-19. Demonetization and GST may have contributed to that, but I'm coming to the specific point about inflation. If I just take the CPI as an indicator, the big spikes have started from late last calendar year and actually started moving up aggressively since Jan this year, 6% and onwards, and now 7% for the last 3 or 4 months. That seems to be a direct correlation to the Ukraine-Russia war. So on that specific point, can we deny that the Ukraine-Russia war, the spike in crude prices, has fueled inflation the world over, including in the US, which has seen a 40-year high? Can we say that our inflation has nothing to do with this factor?
Well, Tamanna, in fact, if I was to contextualize your question, it provides the answer itself. The Russian-Ukrainian war commenced on the 26th of February, 2022. In India, inflation started moving up in 2021 itself. In fact, you had double-digit inflation for almost 14 months, which is a 30-year high. So therefore, to peg it or to hang your coat on the Russian-Ukrainian war peg, I think is erroneous. Number one, we are self-sufficient in wheat. If at all the world has suffered, it is primarily because wheat exports from Ukraine especially have virtually came down to zero till the time a ship left yesterday. So therefore, a large number of countries in Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, have been clearly impacted by the Russian-Ukrainian war. But fortunately, we are self-sufficient insofar as food is concerned. And in fact, on the crude oil front and the fertilizer front, as I pointed out earlier, we've really been beneficiaries. So therefore, I fail to understand, and of course, I'm no great student of economics, but whatever little rudimentary economics that I can grasp, that how is the Indian inflation really linked to the Russian-Ukrainian war? Because what you are seeing is a spike in food prices, and we are not importing food except for, of course, palm oil, etc., which again is not something which is grown or exported out of Ukraine.
The crude oil prices, of course, have been to some part spiked by Ukraine, but the palm oil prices was an Indonesia issue that got sorted out. I just want to clarify, sir, you talked about 14 months of double-digit inflation. You're talking about the WPI, the wholesale price index?
Well, what
because the CPI has been 7% odd.
That's right. I'm talking about headline inflation. So therefore, the consumer price index, and especially the consumer food price index, which was in the April of 2021 at 1.96%, by the April of 2022 had moved up to 8.38%. It moderated slightly to 7.75% in June, but the consumer food price index has never been this high. So therefore, if you juxtapose WPI along with the consumer food price index, you actually get a fair inkling of the distress that it is causing in the economy.
So the response to that from the government side is that since April 2020, we've been giving free food grains of 5 kilograms a month to close to 80 crore Indians. That scheme has now been extended till the September of this year. And the argument is that no one is starving. Inflation is high, petrol prices, fuel prices are high, but we're ensuring that nobody is starving. Do you think that could be the best possible response in this scenario?
Well, that's a completely insidious response, because if you rewind back to 2013 to the Food Security Act, which of course the BJP was completely reluctant to allow passage in Parliament at that point in time, the Food Security Act mandated that we were giving food grains at extremely subsidized prices, atta at about wheat at about 2 rupees a kilo, rice at about the same price, coarse grains a little less, to about 77% of the population of India. So even when there was a normal situation, there was subsidized food grain which was being provided to an overwhelming bulk of the population, almost three-fourths of the Indian population. So therefore, if you moved from a 2 rupee paradigm to, let's say, a 0 rupee paradigm, essentially how much does it really impact the budget of the government? And number two, what is even more insidious, Tamanna, is that uh, all that you did in terms of trying to alleviate distress during the period of COVID 19 was to extend credit guarantees. In fact, all over the world, economies or governments have put cash into the hands of people. You look at the United States, you look at some of the other European countries, you look at even countries in Asia, they actually transferred cash directly into the hands of the people. And that's what we've been trying to impress upon this government, that the solution to India's economic problem does not lie in giving concessions to corporate India, because that is clearly not kickstarting the economy. The economy will only kickstart if consumption goes up. And they've tried the model of government-led consumption, by hiking public expenditure, which has again not worked at all.
So some economists would argue that if more cash was given in the hands of people, it would have led to even more inflation at this point. What would you have done? I must ask you this because you've had, a lengthy experience in government, so has your party, and that's an obvious thing to say. What is the solution? What is the alternative? Because to the common man, this debate seems like it's just come down to political pot shots with no real solutions in sight.
Well, the solution is very clear. You see, during the 10 years of the UPA government, you saw high growth, but you also saw high inflation. And so, therefore, at a time of distress, if we would have put money into the hands of the people, that money essentially would have gone into consumption. And that consumption at this point in time would have translated essentially into consumption of food items, which would have then added to the bottom lines of the farmers. So, therefore, you would have seen farm incomes going up. You would have seen that a bulk of the people would have been satisfied from the consumption perspective. And yes, there would have been a specter of inflation. But then, if there was a general sense of satisfaction and not the kind of distress that we are seeing in the economy, maybe you could have lived with even a higher rate of headline inflation, which would have moderated over a period of time.
How would you respond to the points that the finance minister made on high inflation in the UPA years? And this is, of course, in the public domain, well documented. We had double-digit retail inflation, CPI, headline inflation at about 10%, 11% for several months in a row. In fact, it was a huge political assault by the then opposition against your government at that time. Didn't, in hindsight, the UPA also failed to curb inflation, which was at higher rates compared to now?
Well, Tamanna, I think I answered that question partly earlier. And I alluded to the fact that if you look at the tenure of UPA 1, you had an average 8.36% rate of GDP growth year on year for 5 years. And if you look at UPA 2, you had a year on year growth, an average growth rate of 7.68%. So therefore, you essentially had an economy which was growing at about 8% year on year for 10 long years, notwithstanding the global economic meltdown, the Eurozone crisis. And what do you see with the first term of the NDA BJP government, even when there was no COVID? So 2017-18, 6.8%, 2018-19, 6.6%, 2019, 23.7%, 2021, minus 6.6%. and 21, 22, 8.9%, which is actually a mythical figure because when you rise from a low base year, you have a GDP growth of 2.3%. So what essentially you are seeing in this country, which you didn't see during the UPA years, is actually low GDP growth and high inflation. And that's the killer.
In terms of the politics of it, Mr. Tewari, we've spoken in great detail of the economic rationale, what the finance minister is saying. She's saying, yes, there's inflation, I'm not denying it, but, you know, we're doing our best. You're saying they've not done well enough. Is it resonating politically in your view? People are hurting, but are they blaming the current government for this? As a politician, foremost, do you believe this is going to hurt a very powerful political party right now?
Well, Tamanna, you've asked an extremely relevant question. And I don't think this is so much about the politics of it as it is about, trying to alleviate distress. I represent a agrarian constituency. We have 1,499 or 1,500 villages in my constituency. We have 13 urban agglomerations, small towns. And when I go around the rural and the semi-urban areas of my constituency, I see that one half of the shops are shut. I see that Manrega demand is at an all-time high. So therefore, even the shining spot during COVID-19, which was the agrarian sector, you see an unprecedented rise in Manrega demand, which is indicative of rural distress. So therefore, everything is not about the politics of it. Everything ultimately boils down to why are you in public life? And the reason why you are in public life is primarily to better the lives of people, which is not really happening at this point in time.
Right. It's a fight that will continue, I'm sure, in Parliament and outside. Thank you so much, Mr. Tewari, for speaking with us today and answering all of our questions.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you very much.